Okay, next we've got Ian Henshall, who's a campaigner and best-selling author of 9/11: The New Evidence on the latest 9/11 news and the intelligence trap.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Ian Henshall. I didn't need to say that any longer. I'm assuming that people here have got some basic knowledge of 9/11. It's a very broad issue to have to update the news about 9/11 investigations to people who know nothing at all about it. So forgive me if you know less than I'm assuming about the 9/11 attacks. Now, I'm here to talk about just the latest bits of news. So they're not like the most important bits of evidence as to, why many people doubt the official story of 9/11. They're just the newest things, because I'm trying to make the point in a way that it's still very much an ongoing issue, the 9/11 issue. Many people see it as the Achilles heel of the whole warmongering crowd who seem to have taken over NATO and the EU in the intervening period. I'll just make a couple of general points. And I think this is quite an important point to understand why people still believe the official story about 9/11. There's really two models that people have about how our society works. There's what you might call the mainstream model, the standard model, and that is that it's divided up into institutions. You've got the CIA, you've got special branch, you've got the Home Office, you've got all the different institutions. And they make their policy and they get ordered by their democratic masters to carry out policy which is discussed, at least in cabinet, if not in party conferences and in public. And that's one theory. And it's all discussed openly, sort of secretly in government, but openly within that secrecy, if you see what I mean. That's the official explanation of how things work. The alternative explanation is that actually there are criminal networks that have infiltrated this system. And of course we know that is the case in many minor ways. Everybody knows that the best way to be a drug smuggler is to have a friend in a drug squad, for instance. But what we're more focusing on here is the top level. And the theory is, which I would advocate, is that it is possible for these top level power centres to be taken over by criminal networks. So when you present, somebody with the idea that 9/11 might be an inside job, people who follow the mainstream theory, the standard theory, they're going to think, well, how could all these institutions, they're going to think, you're saying, if you say, for instance, that people in the CIA might have had a hand in it, they're going to be, people who believe in the official version are going to start thinking, well, how could the whole of the CIA know about that? Surely the memos would be copied to other departments, as they always are. How could they possibly keep that secret? You'd have to have the whole of the CIA, or at least a huge number of it. And then, they would suppose the memos get leaked to the media will publish it. But if you take the sort of criminal network theory, of course, that's not a problem at all, because you're not saying the whole of the CIA. All it really needs is one cell within the CIA to organise something like 9/11, arguably. So that's, I think, the really important dividing line, and it explains why people in the mainstream are so resistant to, any sort of corruption, actually. Corruption allegations are now known as conspiracy theories, which carries the implication that they're wrong. That's a bit silly. So there we are, that's one general point. Second general point, I'm not going to talk about the Twin Towers. There's lots talked about them. I don't dispute any of the objections that are raised to the official story, but I'm not an architect. There's people much better qualified than me to talk about that. I prefer to talk about the paper trail, because I think that all the people like me, who are sort of arts graduate types, who control the media, lawyers and arts graduates basically, they don't understand architecture either. And they're going to just say, well, where are the experts? We don't know. But they do understand about paper trails. That's their whole business. Government reports, all that sort of thing. So I'm just going to go through a few bullet points here, really. As I said, these aren't things that sort of prove that 9/11 was an inside job, but it all accumulates, and this is just what's accumulated in the last year or so. And there's been 10 years of accumulation. I could accumulate for hours. but no intention of doing that. Well, here's another one recently. The US Delta Forces, prime suspects in any 9/11 conspiracy that might have been an inside job. We've now found out that the Bush regime, to try and keep things on the boil after 9/11, they were looking around for proposals, and the Delta Forces came up with a proposal, can you believe this, for a fake hijacking with the first-class passengers, all stooges, and the hijacking was going to be sort of foiled at the last minute. This was their plan. It's reminiscent of the plan to bomb Cuba by creating a fake shoot-down known as Operation Northwoods, that a lot of people here will have heard of. But, how extraordinary that, just within a few weeks of 9/11, somebody should be proposing something like that within the US government and taken seriously. You may recall that even Tony Blair actually, or one of his officials, leaked George Bush's idea of having a fake shoot-down of a plane over Iraq to get the Iraq war going. And that was, it wasn't denied, and it came from top officials in Britain. And of course, as we know, prior knowledge, is obviously something that people look for who investigate these sort of things. And we know that the neocons who were in their manifestations project for the New American Century just before 9/11, they said that they wouldn't get what they wanted. They did want to place a military permanently in Iraq, with or without the presence of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So in other words, they didn't want to just liberate Iraq, they wanted to get an American occupation of Iraq. They said that they would have trouble achieving this absent a Pearl Harbor type event. They didn't say, oh, we'd like to create a Pearl Harbor. They've been misquoted, but they did make it very clear that they were completely aware that to get their goals, they needed something like 9/11, a Pearl Harbor type event, which of course 9/11 was called by everybody the new Pearl Harbor, Bush and his opponents. So, and we also know that I mentioned this in all my talks because the rest of the 9/11 Truth Movement doesn't seem to have caught onto it, but we know from the then Treasury Secretary, Paul O'Neill, that the first item on the agenda of the first cabinet meeting of the Bush administration in 2001, the first item concerned the plans to invade and occupy Iraq. And Paul O'Neill, the Treasury Secretary, who obviously wasn't in on it, was absolutely shocked. He thought, with all the things we've got, how can they possibly, A, put the invasion of Iraq top of their list, and B, how can they possibly think they're going to achieve it? Without, as we now know, of course, maybe they did know how they were going to achieve it. It all sort of fits. We're talking about a jigsaw puzzle, really, and you get lots of bits of the jigsaw, and no one bit proves that much by itself. But as you gradually assemble them, you find out that they wouldn't do it, that they could keep it secret. We know they could keep it secret because when they leaked, or an indication they could have kept this secret from, even if the media had been tipped off, was that when the New York Times was tipped off about the massive illegal warrantless surveillance program of the Bush regime, they didn't tell the public. They kept it secret for well over a year. And it's probably only because somebody else was threatening to put it out publicly that they ever did, come out with it. Talking about, once again, about the paper trail, I'd just draw your attention to the German journalist Lars Schall, who spoke at a meeting that some of us organised a year or two ago. He's doing a book on the insider trading prior to 9/11. And he's dug up a quote from an ex-CIA operative called Robert Baer, who's quite an interesting guy. He's trusted by the mainstream media. And he said on a radio show, I knew the guy that went into his broker in San Diego, notice the little detail there, and said, cash me out, it's going down tomorrow. His brother works at the White House. Well, that guy, Robert Baer, is an ex-station chief in the CIA. And so his testimony, is probably worth listening to. Right, well that's the sort of foreknowledge area. And now there's been quite a lot of stuff on the sort of Al-Qaeda theory, and I mean the Al-Qaeda story is just such a shambles, isn't it? First of all it's like there are mortal enemies, then it's like, well, we did cooperate with them in the past but we never will do it again. And then it's, well, they're not actually Al-Qaeda that we're sending the arms to, they're somebody else, you know, isn't what we're hearing now in Syria. So, you know, it's a pretty disastrous story. And as the bits fall in together, I mean, the official story on Al-Qaeda has now become, without, you know, to slightly parody it, they were best of friends with the CIA until about March 2001. They were enemies for maybe a year, 2 years, and then they were friends again. I mean, that's bad enough, isn't it? But Hamid Karzai, you know, the maverick, you know, the guy they installed in charge of Afghanistan, but he went maverick on them, and they would spend a lot of time trying to get rid of him. But he said recently that Al-Qaeda is a myth, and when pressed by the journalists, Western journalists, they said, oh, didn't we carry out? He said, we're told this by our Western friends, which, you know, basically means what a load of bullshit, but they're on my payroll, you know, so I can't say more than that. And then questions again, he said, well, that's what the Western media says. So, you know, basically you've got the guy they installed as the president of Afghanistan saying that the whole story is a load of rubbish. Then you've got the case of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's now taken the role of key organizer after Osama bin Laden was sort of discredited as a sort of serious figure, a serious organizational figure in Al-Qaeda. And the official story is now that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed organized it all. And maybe he did organize things for them, and maybe, as Robert Fisk in The Independent has said, he is actually a Western agent, and maybe that's why we haven't yet seen him on trial. Because after all, he was arrested 10 years ago. The Obama regime said they were going to put him on trial as soon as possible. That was 8 years ago. It's just gone on and on. You know, they obviously do not want to put this guy on the witness stand. And so that's, you know, I think quite significant. And that latest delay of 6 months was announced quite recently. There's a court action in America that's looking into the Saudi connection with 9/11, the financing of the alleged hijackers by senior people in the Saudi royal family. That's established, pretty much established. But the issue is, you know, did they do it as Saudi officials, or did they do it as independent, you know, people? And because if they did it as just an independent criminal operation, then they should be brought before the courts. But if they did it officially as Saudi representatives, then they're protected by what's known as sovereign immunity. And each time Saudi falls out of favour with Washington, this court case gets reinstated, you know, to basically chase Prince Bandar into the courts and get him to testify about why he gave money to the people who were later named as Al-Qaeda terrorists. And then, you know, then the case gets, but at the moment it seems that Washington wants to be nice to the Saudis, so the case is being sort of held for another 6 months or a year, but it's going to rumble on. And in the end, when somebody decides, you know, there are so many ways that this story can come out, all it really needs is a few people at the top to decide that they want it to come out, and then it will do. But of course, if you're Putin, you know, maybe he did some dodgy stuff as well with those town blocks of his that started collapsing, you know, and even if he didn't, you know, why, you know, you can only blackmail people with something that's secret. If you want to tell everybody about it, you can't blackmail them with it any longer. So, you know, politics is all about blackmail, and so, you know, probably a lot of people in the world, you know, level know that it was an inside, you know, it probably was an inside job. Okay, I just mentioned here, Jeremy Corbyn has been said to have endorsed the 9/11 Truth Movement, but actually, I mean, it would be nice if he had done, and we have spoken to him, and we feel that he, you know, a lot of us feel that he morally does endorse us, but actually he said it was a manipulated event, and he didn't actually, if you read carefully what he said, it was not, you know, that it was manipulated by the CIA, but more that they manipulated it afterwards, which is the standard left-wing position, you know, the mainstream left position. But I still think Corbyn's a good guy, and, you know, in time I think he'll, I mean, really all he needs to do is to quietly get into office and then institute an inquiry into it, and the whole thing will come out if he puts the right people on the inquiry. So why risk it all now? We found out that of the illegally issued visas to the alleged 9/11 hijackers, they were illegally issued because we've seen photocopies of them. They've been put into circulation, funnily enough, by the Israel lobby, and that they should never have been given visas. So we've now found out that 12 out of the 19 visas were authorised by one US official by the name of Sheena Steiger in Saudi Arabia, and that her colleagues objected to issuing these flagrantly illegal visas, but she got away with it and nobody's questioned her or investigated it since. We've had Jeb Bush has recently been challenged on the files. You may not know, it's one of the little subplots of the 9/11 story, but on the day of 9/11, Jeb Bush arrived at the nearby, I guess, the air schools that the hijackers were alleged to have trained at, and he removed all the hijackers' files, and we know that because a policeman witnessed it and went on the record as having that happened. And Jeb Bush might have forgotten all about that, but the rest of us haven't. And he was just recently put, most embarrassingly, on the spot by a mainstream journalist asking him, why did he collect those files and what's happened to them? Of course, he didn't answer. And then we've got, I think, quite a nice little story, the Osama bin Laden library. Well, according to the CIA, Osama bin Laden, spent his time in his later years reading books and surfing the internet, just like any 9/11 skeptic does. And on his bookshelf was, they said, 50% of his books were conspiracy theory books. They never mentioned my book. I'm so disappointed. But Michael Rupert's book was probably, the Beyond the Rubicon, which is one of the sort of standard 9/11 works, was mentioned. But if you think about it, there's two explanations for his 5 minutes, is it?
One.
Yeah, okay. 1 or 5?
Sorry, one.
Oh, 1, oh my God. Okay, well, you can see from that it's all a bit silly, because it was probably just made up completely to smear 9/11 skeptics, because if Osama bin Laden did carry out 9/11, why on earth would he be interested in reading books at great length by people who think that it was Washington, Unless, of course, Michael Rupert was a secret agent of Osama bin Laden's, there to sort of discredit the American, I don't know, it's all crazy stuff. And the obvious explanation is that they just wanted to smear Michael Rupert and smear 9/11 skeptics. So I'll just mention quickly that there is still a 9/11 Truth campaign. It's as active as ever. There's a load of leaflets out the back. This is the opportunity, we've got a very bland, generic leaflet. It doesn't mean that that's what we all think. Well, we do all agree with it, because it's only asking questions most of the time. But anybody can give this out. If you think it was an inside job run by space aliens, you can still give out that leaflet, because it'll at least open the door, to whatever you think. And we're basically just taking a fairly standard liberal analysis in that leaflet, but that's why. Recently, the architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth have created 20,000 booklets, which they're sending out to experts. It's very difficult to get hold of them over here. The carriage costs are very high. If anybody's interested in trying to, arrange for 50 or 100 of them to come over, that would be great, because we need somebody who's got shipping, who knows how to get the shipping system working properly from America. On the media front, we've now got a second front opened up. We haven't just got the Saudi Arabia connection, which the media are now openly talking about the whole time. We've also got Mark Rossini, an FBI officer who was forced by the CIA to keep a whole lot of secrets prior to 9/11. He was refused permission to pass them over, as he should have been able to his FBI colleagues, who would then have arrested some of the alleged hijackers, who would then have aborted the operation. And Mark Rossini is getting angrier and angrier as time goes by. And he's been quoted in Newsweek as saying there would have been no 9/11 if he hadn't been ordered by his CIA contacts. He was based temporarily on secondment to the CIA. If he hadn't been ordered to shut up about it. And just to mention a couple of very quickly.
Okay.
Am I in 1 minute? Okay. John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He addressed the most recent 9/11 symposium in New York, so that's nice to have somebody of his stature. And then Kevin Ryan, who's brought out an excellent book, and this is my very last point, Another 19. He's looked at the insiders who might have been organising 9/11 if it was an inside job. And he's just discovered an excellent new book apparently called Spy the Lie. CIA officers explain how you can analyse people's responses to questions to find out if they're telling the truth or not. And he's applied this to various people being asked questions about 9/11 and found that, according to the authors of Spy the Lie, these guys are lying. Okay, thanks very much.